And so it leaves me with the great pleasure of introducing Victoria again. No, we're delighted. How lucky are we? Victoria, you're here today to lead us in a session on the chapters in the book that cover peace, justice, reconciliation, but particularly Palestine from your most recent experience. As ever, we're delighted that you're here with us. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning. This is the last time of me. Yay! So I was always thinking, oh, I think we're okay. Okay. This was a session for Annie and Jack, but Annie and Jack have been very busy with the hospitality of us and doing a great job. So there was a spare session. So I thought if I was going to do a chapter in the book, which I didn't because I wanted more young people to do it, what would I have done it on? And I would have definitely done it on Palestine. So this is my chance to talk about it. So thank you for indulging me. I was really lucky and I've been to Palestine twice. So I went first with Yad Vashem and the Council for Christians and Jews. So the United Reformed Church passed a motion in the 2021 General Assembly that talked about pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And we're encouraging our church members to go with Palestinian tour guides and to understand the occupation and to go to the West Bank and experience Palestine from a larger perspective. But the Deputy Board of Chief Rabbis, is that what it's called? They were less than happy with our resolution. So we said, well, we'll send 3 members onto this Yad Vashem trip. So I was one of them. So it was like a Holocaust education week, and it was really great. The group was lovely. It was a really informative time. The historical research they do there is top notch, but Palestinians were pretty much absent. And I found that really, really hard. Really hard. But then I was lucky enough to go back. So I went with Bethlehem Bible College not too long ago for a course on peace and justice in the context of Palestine. And so it was about elevating the voices of Palestinians and really working through these issues with an international group. So staying in Bethlehem, when I traveled around and I'm in the course, it was the first year, so there were teething problems, but it was a really transformative experience. So today, I'm hoping to use a few little snippets of what I learned there and some of my more like theological thinking around this topic so we can explore together what peace and justice might look like, maybe inspired by Palestine. So why is it so hard, thank you, to talk about Palestine? And this is a question that this is the question that really interests me. So I found young people, they either find it really easy to talk about Palestine and they're really passionate and they already know so much, or it's the opposite and they're really shy and really quite like worried when you talk about it or ask them to talk about it. So at the University of Edinburgh, I tutor a course called Religion, Violence and Peacebuilding. And one of those weeks is named the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I mean, we're beyond that spot of thinking of it like a conflict, but I couldn't quite get him to change the name. And the first time I taught this class, all of my students were quite young, so 17 or 18, height of the pandemic. It was on Zoom, but it was the most incredible session I've ever had. The young people, I asked them, so how confident do you feel about understanding what's going on in Israel-Palestine? From the scale to 1 to 10, 1, I know absolutely nothing, 10, I'm an expert. Nobody went above 3. I said, okay, that's fine. We all start somewhere. Let's explore this together. And by the end of the class, they were so enthusiastic. I had 4 students ask me for a reading list. This doesn't happen. It was so exciting. I was like, really? You guys are going to read? Read the tutorial readings first. It was great. And then lots of them did their essays on it. And the same, the same with the second group. It was really interesting. So I just felt like sometimes you just need to give people permission. But I actually think it's really important that we should be thinking about Palestine and why are people so nervous to think about it? And I think a lot of this nervousness is due to like the scared nature that anti-Semitism is posing on us. And it's horrible to be labeled as something, when especially people like us, when we see ourselves as progressive, radical Christians. If we're labeled, well, then that does that put everything else we stand for in jeopardy, right? But we also know that there's a big difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And we as Christians are called out to speak up for justice in the world. So I think we should have confidence to call things out, as we're also humble ourselves and humble in our own institutions and forthright in pointing out our own wrongs as Christians. Language. This is key, and this fascinates me. Why do we say Israeli operations but Palestinian terrorists, right? And how much whiteness is being used here as well, and Western ideas? Who is it that has authority? When we're reading words, who is it that's speaking? Who is it that's getting into our newspapers? Who's being shadowed or blocked on Twitter, on Facebook? So I actually, the student Christian movement have just posted a prayer because Gaza is being bombed. I talked about this in my sermon. And I've obviously got some sort of restriction on me on Instagram because I tried to share it and I can't put it on my story. I'm shocked. And lastly, who is it that gets to speak, and how are they allowed to speak? So I ran a reading group for 7 months looking at Palestinian liberation theology. And it brought people from all around the world and different denominations, and it was amazing and so transformative. And this was lockdown, and this was when Sheikh Jarrah, it was getting really serious there. And I noticed as I'm reading all of these liberation theology books, Palestinians constantly have to speak for Israelis. They always have to justify the state of Israel. They always have to talk about their neighbor. But of course, Israelis don't have to do that. They can just talk about Israel and their own legacy, but Palestinians have to constantly relate themselves to their oppressor. So John Mania, who's a young Palestinian, at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference, which I was lucky enough to go to, he referred to this with, many of you will know, Frantz Fanon's black skin, white masks. So he talked about Palestinians. They're never really allowed to be fully Palestinian because they have to be Palestinians in relation to Israelis. So he critiqued this. He critiqued how they've done Palestinian theology. And his elders were so mad at him. How dare you, they said. How dare you talk about our legacy like that? How dare you not stand on the shoulders of your elders? How dare you challenge us? Again, so I just found that really, really interesting. How are we allowing Palestinians to speak, and how are we allowing them self-determination? And then finally, women. Women aren't involved in peace building very often. So in our religion, violence, and peace building course, I got my students to go through my reading list, and they picked out of like 30 books, 3 were either written or co-written by women. So I was just wondering, in your Common Concern network, I know we've got Jan, but how many women do you have in the Israel-Palestine? Yeah. Yeah? That's perfect. That's trailblazing. You should shout about that, because women usually are not given the space in peace building conversations. And I'm going to try and touch on this as we go on today. So as a group discussion leading on from that, I'd like you to talk about how confident do you feel talking about Palestine? And secondly, how on earth do you bring up the conversation of occupation and violence in a normal conversation? Can you do that? Do you do that? Do you have any idea on how you might go about that? So just for maybe 5 minutes. Oh yeah, absolutely. The second question, how do you bring up the topic of occupation and violence in the West Bank and Gaza in a conversation?
Fiona, East Anglia. I think one of the difficulties is there is no Palestinian state. This is not a conflict of equals. There is great inequality in the way it's framed, and we have to address that. If we treat it as a conflict of equals, we do great disservice to the Palestinian people.
Alison, Black Midlands. That's the Black Midlands Lives Matter. Sorry, Black Mountains. We were touching on the fact that to speak out in support of Palestine and the Palestinian people often leaves us open to accusations of anti-Semitism. And that is a concern, that if you have to make a choice, and you do have to make a choice, but you have to make a choice that doesn't then make assumptions that because you are supportive of one group of people, that's not that you are condemning what's happening or supporting what's happening, but you have to be aware of and mindful of the situation, because there's a distinction between Israeli government policy and national policy and Israeli people. And I think we have to hold on to the humanity on both sides. But yeah, I feel uncomfortable saying I don't know a great deal. I'd be a 3 or a 4, possibly 4.5 on a good day. But I know that if I talked about it, there would be a pushback on, well, if you think that, then you must be anti-Semitic, which I'm not.
Hello, Scott.
Scott Blythe, Glasgow Southwest. I think the other issue is the fact that this issue has become so media polarized. You know, the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is pilloried every time he makes a comment on this whole area, partly because of the hate of him and what they see him representing, but also because there is such a strong media voice that has been shifted so far to the right in favor of Israel that it's hard to speak and have dialogue that is human. It's become a bipolar issue again, this bipolarism that we often do, right, wrong, instead of understanding the reality that everything is on spectrums in life and that you need to find a way to negotiate a medium point, gets lost.
Sorry, Liz Dowler, Thames Valley. I'm asking a question rather than responding. The responses so far, which have been powerful, have all been about people's experience, I think, in the UK. I'd be really interested to hear from people living in other countries about them.
Mary Pearson, Australia. This is not nearly such a headline issue. Obviously, we know about it and it does make the papers, but it's not something that I would be in a meeting that would come up as an issue, probably. There is a very strong Jewish political alliance as well in Australia, as there is in the United States. So because I've been involved in interfaith work, I'm often being invited to like celebrate the birthday of the State of Israel events, as I was just very recently. So as I do every year, I give my apologies. I should perhaps say a bit more about why I apologize, but that's a bit difficult as an individual into that enormously powerful political lobby, but maybe I will the next time. So.
Let's just take one last one. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time this morning.
Thank you. Just briefly, it gave me hope to hear about this other organization that, you know, an organization of I think Israeli Jewish folks who were supportive of the Palestinians, and I can't remember the details, but for those of us in the States, Peace Now in Israel and Americans for Peace Now gives me a lot of hope, because it's Jewish folks who are really challenging the Israeli political establishment. that gives me confidence that I can, work with folks who are Jewish on this issue. And yes, it has theological, origins, and it has, but really it becomes a political problem. And when we have Jews and Christians working together in an organization like Peace Now and Americans for Peace Now, it gives me a lot of hope. It's been so fleeting, but I just have that hope. I'm not optimistic, but don't we need to have hope?
I think we're called to have hope. And I think being on both sides of the wall, to use a Munter Isaac phrase, I did find that on the Israeli side, there wasn't a great need for peace. There's a comfort, there's a steadiness to their society. On the Palestinian side, my goodness, they are tired. And the thing they kept just saying again and again and again, and if you read anything, is that we have no voice. Please be our voice. But they're not able to have self-determination in the West so much of the time. Okay, we're getting a little bit theological now. What does justice and peace look like? So I love these quotes by Amos. Oh, the color's so bad. Sorry. Amos 5:2-4. But let justice roll on like a river and righteousness like a never failing stream. Oh, yeah. I'll repeat. Thank you. Let justice roll on like a river and righteousness like a never failing stream. And Amos 5:7, I also think is very important. There are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. There are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. Amos 5:7. So Amos 5 is a prophetic cry that exposes the exploitation and injustice apparent in his ancient Israel. Talking about justice like a river and righteousness like a never-ending stream gives connotations of abundance, flourishing, and the other thing about water is that it's naturally uncontrollable, despite our very expensive attempts to govern it. But obviously today, water is a massive issue for Palestinians. The Holy Land does not flow with milk and honey, but is partitioned between those who deserve citizenship, sustenance, and rights, and those who are controlled, encaged, and collectively punished. And we, as Westerners, romanticize this place. We go on biblical, archaeological Disneyland pilgrimages, forgetting our British imperial legacy here and how our European guilt ethnically cleansed Palestinians from their homes and created a system of apartheid, where justice for the people who endured the horrors of the Holocaust to vindicate us from our guilt caused the Nakba. And I think sometimes we think that enacting justice can be quite easy. It's just giving back to the victim what was taken from the oppressor, right? By the oppressor. But when visiting Sheikh Jarrah, an old Palestinian man asked our group if anybody was British. So I really sheepishly put up my hand. And he spoke to me in Arabic, but with such intensity, his message came across to me despite our language barrier. And later it was translated, and he said, "This is your fault. The British and Balfour. Why do you do nothing to change your mistake?" His anger was there. And I felt like this man had been holding on to this for such a long time. And I nodded at him and I just said, I know. And I was thinking, how on earth do I begin to apologize on behalf of my country? But then he handed me some Arabic coffee, a really good date, hugged me and called me his sister. So I've been thinking about how our sometimes simplifications of justice and humanity is really dangerous. And how can we, as a colonial power, possibly have had the authority to decide the fate of the indigenous subjects? How can the upper classes of our society possibly know how to help the poor, especially when their poverty allows them to live the way that they do? How can we possibly begin to understand the lives of refugees when the brownness or the blackness of their skin is used to contrast as a contrast to talk about the deservedness of Ukrainian refugees? But Amos warns us of this. There are those who turns justice into bitterness and casts righteousness to the ground. The individualism of neo-capitalism makes everything a competition. Why them and why not me? And we homogenize and we demonize. We call groups of people illegal. We blame those with hope for their own deaths because they got on the boat in the first place. We talk about needing to look after our own, being white people, and not get involved with helping others because of the myth of neo-capitalism, that there's just not enough. And I mean, Anna talked about this, there is enough. But bitterness is so rife in our society. But coming from my Reformed Calvinistic tradition, I think dwelling on our shared human depravity is important. We don't have clear-cut heroes or visions in our worlds. People are complicated, deeply flawed, and devastatingly both distanced and close to God. We are competitive and greedy and work both individualistically and communally. And this is why I don't think we can ever think of justice as simple and definitely not analytically. The plight for justice, I don't think, can be an intellectual, rationalistic, removed exercise, but instead to seek justice is to enter into an introspective, reflexive, and highly emotionally engaged pursuit. How can we be neutral or cold or removed when thinking about justice? But thinking about it in a way that's not cold or hard or removed is way harder. And I think we also do this to protect ourselves. Because the violence that we see every day on the news, the climate emergency, the normality of exploitation, that's not healthy and that's not flourishing. That's not godlike. So we blind ourselves to the other and stop our emotions in order to cope, to be able to continue with our lives a little bit less disturbed. But when we create this space for anger, the space for laments, when we share in the suffering or frustration or pain, I think something begins to be restored. And let's go back to this bonds of peace in Ephesians 4, 1-16. Because we know we can't have peace without being bonded to the other. Tolerance is not peace. Peace is full, intentional, costly, and loving. If we see justice as the restoration of relationships, maybe we'll see the need to invest, to be alongside, and to enter into the other as Christ was incarnated and came into us in his fullness. Justice can't mean cold, logistical, or rationalistic solutions, but deep work of mending, feeding, and re-intertwining with the other. So this idea, justice as the restoration of relationships. Can you think of any examples where you saw relationships restored and justice being served? Or would you use a different definition to justice, for justice? So another 5 minutes in your groups and then we can come back. Can you read these ones? Oh, you can read these ones, great.
Yeah, Colin Ball from the West Midlands. We had a little bit of kind of struggling to get into this new paradigm of relationships because injustice is structural and built into society and institutions. And until you change those societies and institutions and make them more just to begin with, you cannot form relationships, and just forming relationships and getting alongside people is important. It's good stuff, but it doesn't actually bring justice necessarily, other than in a different kind of relationship.
I'll come to Alison first and then to Chris. Alison Jackson from the Bristol Family Group. We came up with 3.5 examples. The first was that one of us has experience of restorative justice in the criminal justice system in the US, and another has experience of how something similar is working in the Aboriginal and Maori populations in Australia and New Zealand. One of us came up with the example of the Good Friday Agreement, which was very much driven by the development of a relationship between Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness. And I came up with an example from Church Action on Poverty, where an exploitative way of charging interest to people in poverty for their white goods was changed when we facilitated the meeting of the chief executive of the company with a group of the people who were suffering from what he was doing. And to be fair to the man, until he spoke to them, he just didn't understand.
Chris Pole-Hill, West Midlands Family Group. We talked about justice as the restoration of right relationship, and adding in a bit of onomatopoeia there. Sorry, I've forgotten your name again. Leanne was explaining how to, coming from Northern Ireland, she'd never really heard the other, when she went to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, she heard the other story. And it is the interchange of stories. My contribution to this bit is that part of me wants to just stop talking about the Holocaust, because without the Balfour Treaty, which happened, I mean, somebody will come up with the dates and I can't remember it, but I know it was, it's early 19s, before we get into fighting. And that made a huge base from which a lot of this injustice has happened.
Thank you. That was really, really rich feedback. Really rich. Thank you. I'm going to get on to your, what's your, Colin? Is it Colin? Yeah. I'm going to address that hopefully later. Maybe not as well as you did, because that was really good. Okay. Moving on. Part of what I'm thinking about this idea of relationships, justice as a restoration of relationship, is to critique Western epistemology. Epistemology just simply means the way we think. So the way we think in the West tends to be like from the Enlightenment period, rationalistic, removed, logistical, that kind of thing. And I've got a case study, which I've named Period, and you'll find out why. So when I was in Bethlehem, on the 7th day that I was there, I started my period. And it was laundry day, so I only had a white dress. And I had to wear it for a very long day trip in Jericho in the desert. It's fine. I thought I'll just skip breakfast and I'll go to the little shop down the road and I'll get some good tampons before the bus arrives. There was one box of tampons in the shop. It was slightly opened, battered, and half behind a row of pads. But they were there. That's what I needed. I was good. I went to pay and the young man behind the till visibly blushed. So he put the box of tampons in a white carrier bag, looked at me, shook his head, and put it in a black carrier bag. And then he said, wait. And he returned with a packet of paracetamol and a mango juice. And he said, these are a gift. And I protested and I didn't win, but I just left the shop like, what just happened? Later during the bus ride, feeling fresh and secure, my mind was taken back to my teenage years. I remember being 14, and after an after-school club, I used to walk to the place where my dad worked. And he kind of worked in this like B&B style accommodation for asylum seekers. And I, at 14, had the code for the office door. The residents, of course, did not. They had to knock the door and wait for a member of staff who was usually a male. So for a demonstration, my dad's 6'5", quite built, to answer, and then they would ask for their personal items, stuff like sanitary products, razors, shower gels, things like that. And a few times I helped my dad do the shop and remember asking why it was they were always buying the 10p shower gel, the razors that cut rather than shave, and sanitary products that itch rather than collect anything. But how most of those menstruating people felt when my shop worker in Palestine was so embarrassed to give me sanitary products as a confident, able-bodied, visiting young white female. These people who had to flee their homes because of war, domestic violence, drought, famine, poverty, we could go on. They couldn't decide where they were going to live, what they could eat, who they had to share a room with, but they're also put through this trauma about one of the most sensitive parts of our lives. And I'm reflecting, I'm thinking about what happened in my first scenario is this man got over his own personal embarrassment and the societal stigma that was harming our relationship, and saw me, a completely unequipped young woman suffering with an unexpected situation, needing some help. And he managed to meet my emotions and went out of his way, spending more time in this awkward situation to ensure that I could flourish throughout my day. Those in the asylum accommodation, however, are met with a pursuit of efficiency. They're seen as fleeting numbers, maybe even locations or case documents that do not deserve to be met in their personhood. Their humanity is met with bare necessity. We could learn so much about justice, perhaps, by stepping away from easy solutions and embracing the complexity, messiness, and divinity of our humanity. Conscious of how our default rationality is blocking these bonds of peace, linking up to the kingdom, and actually instead enabling the status quo by continuing to isolate us from one another. My next case study, power. So I'm thinking that we need to centralize, account for, and dismantle power. And how do we do that? I've got a case study, the normalization of occupation. So when I was in Palestine, one of the places we went to see was called Roots. And Roots works to bring settlers in the West Bank together with Palestinians to start to build relationships. Pretty interesting, I thought. Okay, we'll give it a go. But in this room, we didn't actually get to see the normal work, but we had a rabbi who had emigrated from the States. He had a wonderfully thick New York accent, sat in the middle of the room, and he gave us his testimony, and everyone else sat alongside, including Kamal, who was our Palestinian tour guide. And our rabbi started talking about how he deserved to come to the land. This was Judea and Samaria. This is where he belonged. I'd never heard the terms Judea and Samaria for the West Bank, so I was a bit confused. And talking about how he kind of didn't realize that Palestinians were there. They shouldn't be there. They were just wrong. But then one day his eyes were opened and he realized Palestinians were human too. So he started to think about how he could build relationship with them. But as he was talking, I was noticing that our Palestinian guide, Kamal, was getting more and more upset, feeling really tense, because and then when we started asking questions, I asked, well, if you're making relationships with these Palestinians, how are you giving up your privilege? Are you guys protesting? What is it that you're doing? And he said, well, I'm already in a very vulnerable position by doing this project. Like, not everyone in my community talks to me now. I was like, okay, but I don't quite get it. And then kind of Kamal had a little time to share his perception of what he heard. And the response that the rabbi gave was, well, if you stop killing us, if you stop shooting us, we'll stop the occupation. And he said that 3 times. I could just see the pain in Kamal's face. And I realized that the power in this encounter in no way was equal. We had someone in the center who was the settler, who had control of the narrative, and Kamal was an outsider who was being forced to listen. So at the end, I was really upset. Oh my gosh. I had a little cry and Kamal was comforting me. The Palestinian man was comforting me. And I was like, this is so backwards. What am I doing? I'm so sorry. And he just said, this is normal. This is normalizing the occupation. This project I don't see as creating liberation for Palestinians. This is normalizing our situation. And I found that really hard. And later talking to Munta Isaac about it, he calls this kind of project the peace industry. It's very easy to get funds for this kind of peace work that doesn't necessarily make the powerful vulnerable. So this idea of power I've been caught as quite important when we're thinking about relationships. And so finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our distance from the other. So my favorite philosopher is called Byung-Chul Han, and he's from Korea. And he has this brilliant book called The Expulsion of the Other, Society, Perception, and Communication Today. And his kind of thesis is that capitalism is creating our world to be very small. So when you're on social media, I don't know how many of you have heard of algorithms. Very good, very good. Algorithms pigeonhole you to see only the news that they think you'd be interested to see and sell you only the products that they already believe that you'd be interested to buy, which means that we're not really met with perceptions that are very different to us. And I'm going beyond the political, like I don't want Tory media on my timeline. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that news around the world and perceptions from people around the world is very different. So I'm on a few like youth Facebook groups from like South Africa and Taiwan, and the way they use social media is completely different to how we use it. And just this divide, for instance, is one of those examples where he talks about our distance and our inability to listen to another perception. I don't know, okay. And so kind of what I've got from Byung-Chul Han is how can we have real kenotic encounter with another? So kenosis being the self-emptying of ourselves, how is it that we can be in relationship with someone else and really be able to enter into them by emptying ourselves? So he uses a framework of listening that exposes the beauty hidden in our perceptions of the other. So he explains listening is not a passive act, but instead listening is a bestowal, a giving, and a gift. It helps the other to speak in the first place. It does not passively follow the speech of the other. In a sense, listening precedes the speaking. It is only listening that causes the other to speak. It frees them from their otherness. The listener undertakes the unresolved exposure of the self to the other. Exposure is a further maximum of the ethics of listening. It is the only thing preventing us from pleasing ourselves. The ego is incapable of listening. The space of listening as a resonance chamber of the other opens up where the ego is suspended. The narcissistic ego is replaced with a possession by the other and a desire for the other. I just thought that was really beautiful and it blew me away. And I've used it when talking about receptive ecumenism and Palestine. And some people loved it and then I got into trouble from others and it was great. Byung-Chul Han. It's up there, but it's really hard to read, sorry. And I think this kind of listening, this real encounter when we self-empty, that's going to move us to action. When we have a project like Roots, if we're really listening, surely our privilege becomes less important and our vulnerability becomes really, really fine because we know the ones with the power. And how if I really listen to you and I'm in relationship now with you, how can I help you? So just to finish, I'm going to read the poem that Annie used in her chapter, but I don't have my book with me. because I think this really encapsulates what I'm trying to talk about. And the name is Padrigo Truoma, but I said that wrong. Padrigo Truoma, thank you. And it's called Shaking Hands. Do we know it? Because what's the alternative? Because of courage, because of loved ones lost, because no more. Because it's a small thing, shaking hands. It happens every day. Because I've heard of one man whose hands haven't stopped shaking since a market day in Oma. Because it takes a second to say hate, but it takes longer, much longer, to be a great leader. Much, much longer. Because shared space without human touching doesn't amount to much. Because it's easier to speak to your own than to hold the hand of somebody whose side has been previously described, prescribed, denied. Because it's tough. Because it's tough. Because it's meant to be tough. And this is the stuff of memory, the stuff of hope, the stuff of gesture and meaning and leading. Because it has taken so long. Because it has taken land and money and languages and barrels of blood and grieving. Because lives have been lost. Because lives have been taken. Because to be bereaved is to be troubled by grief. Because more than 2 troubled peoples live here. Because I know a woman whose hand hasn't been shaken since she was a man. Because shaking a hand is only a part of the start. Because I know a woman whose touch calmed a man whose heart was breaking. Because privilege is not to be taken lightly. Because this just might be good. Because who said that this would be easy? Because some people love what you stand for, and some, if you can, they can. Because solidarity means a common hand. Because a hand is only a hand, so hang on to it. So join your much discussed hands. We need this for 1 small second. So touch, so lead. I hadn't read this until Annie put it in the book, and now I love it. Oh. So to finish, maybe we can just do a QA between us all. What's our role? And I think I still struggle with this a little bit too. Is it grassroots political action? Is it top-down peace building? Top-down peace building meaning we get the powerful to talk to the powerful and think about like structures and peace negotiations and things like that. Like the Oslo Accord, which was great, right? No. So are we protesting? What's not our role? What can we learn from our mistakes? And what can we learn from Jesus's example? Maybe what gives you hope? So just 5 minutes and then we'll conclude for the tea break.
Molly Boot on my right, theologian, writer, broadcaster, musician. Is that what it says? There's 3 words that I think it's theologian, musician, and broadcaster. We know Molly already as a wise listener. We know Molly as a deep theologian and as a truly fabulous fiddler. That was remarkable. So friends, I give you Molly Boot.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everyone. Oh my goodness, I am daunted to be bringing up the rear on this incredible week, but we'll see how it goes. So just to give you a little bit of an outline of what I'm going to be doing, we're going to have a conversation to start off with. It's going to be a very easy, gentle conversation. And then I'm going to talk to you a bit. I'm going to talk to you mostly from my chapter. It'll be a kind of a pre-seed version of what I said there, just so we're all on the same page. And then we're going to do some embodied prayer. And this is just going to be a meditative way of praying with some gentle movements. And you don't have to move any more or less than you're comfortable with. And we're going to do that for about half of this session. I figured that we're all probably fairly knackered by this point in the week, so that it would be good to have a chance to land and to be with ourselves and with our bodies in that way. So your starter for 10. I would like you in your groups to have a chat about these 2 images from Iona, from around the island, and to tell me why you think I might have chosen these images to open my session. So just a couple of minutes in your groups, have a chat, and then I'll ask someone to come with the roving mic in a sec. Okay, so to the whole group, what am I up to? Why have I chosen these images to start off with? What's going on? Don't be shy.
Women's bodies.
Women's bodies. Fertility.
You're either a virgin or you're showing your immensurable nobles.
Fiona?
The way in which women are recognized in the island in cultures that would perhaps not necessarily recognize women, because I believe the statue in the cloisters arrived before women were allowed to become members.
So you've all guessed. We've got Achille in the gig. This is from a Guardian article a couple of years ago, big vagina energy. This is an image that pops up all over Ireland, Scotland, England, France, from around about the 11th century onwards, and no one really quite knows why. There are some theories about it being connected to pre-Christian fertility goddesses. There are some theories about different ways in which this kind of Christian iconography might have something to do with protection, although that, you know, how we get there, I'm not entirely sure. But what we do know is that it's clear that sexuality, fertility is at the center of understandings of protection, and it has a pride of place in our spaces of worship from as early as the 11th century. And of course, we've got examples of similar kind of fertility symbols from way before that. So on the island, at the convent, at the Augustinian convent, we've got Achille in the gig that already places sexuality at the center of Christian spirituality on Iona. And then this one, which I think must have been by accident. Otherwise, there was definitely someone who was involved in commissioning this sculpture that knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to embarrass some men. So, I mean, it's not a clitoris, is it? Like, you know, I know it's the Trinity, it's beautiful, but it's also very much the pleasure organ that women and non-binary and trans people have in their bodies, and that's amazing. I mean, what an amazing thing that a symbol of, Victoria's already mentioned the word kenosis, of self-emptying, of the self-giving love of the triune gods, mirrors on purpose or by accident or perhaps by divine design a bit of our anatomy that is designed entirely for pleasure. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my story, which I relate in my chapter, and I am taking this opportunity to read some of my chapter out loud because I haven't got to do that and I did write it as though I was speaking it. So I'd like to do that now, just for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to do some reflective prayer and movement together. So when did I start calling my body it? When did I start to think of them as somehow apart from me, when clearly this bundle of tissues, fluids, systems, and signals is exactly who I am? When we are small, our bodies are watched carefully for signs of growth. How our mouths latch on to our parents' bodies as they feed us, how we track their movements with our eyes, or how we begin to move and lift our heads. Our carers are delighted and concerned with how our vocal cords begin to resonate, how we start to experiment with our hands and our feet, how we roll and play and begin to support our own weights. For our earliest years, those around us are enchanted by the growth of our little bodies. But for me, as for many others, growing up soon became a process of disenchantment. If we are lucky, we go to school and we're praised or chastised for the growth of our minds. We learn to value our intellect. We are made up of memory, skill, experience, and our bodies may fade into our peripheral vision, no longer sites of celebration. From the age of 10, I only remembered my body when she was not what I wanted her to be. When she was too large or too small, too soft or covered with too much hair. And I didn't think about her often at all. When I did, there was a tinge of shame, a longing for something different. By the age of 16, I discovered Jesus. I knew by then that gender didn't have a bearing on my crushes. I liked people who were clean and kind, who played music and loved learning. I liked people who didn't make me afraid to be close to them. I began to explore my body, hoping to find out what made them sing. And I wish I could say I was at ease with this way of existing. But really, I was terrified. My body felt unruly. I didn't know what they wanted or needed or what they were allowed. And desperate for reassurance, I wrote to the pastor of the Baptist church that I'd been attending for the last year. I wrote, "I've been so scared that by telling anyone at church that I think I'm bisexual, that I'd lose the love of all my friends that I rely on so much, especially with issues of church membership. And I'd hate to lose my place in such an amazing, loving community. I'm really sorry. I've tried to convince myself that it's a phase, to ignore it, and even to ask God to change it, and I don't know what to do." And she replied, "Lots of people your age get confused about their sexuality. And I would advise you to avoid putting any labels on yourself. We'll talk it all through, but please rest assured that you are not going to be condemned by me or by God. He knows that all humans are imperfect, and we all mess up and get confused about lots of things in life, and he loves us anyway." At the time, I was overwhelmed with relief, but this was mixed with a sense of foreboding. On one hand, I'd be okay. She wasn't going to condemn me. I wasn't going to lose my church family, and God wasn't going to abandon me. On the other hand, I was messing up, confused. Clearly, this wasn't something that was good or holy. Visiting her house after school the next day, I was given prayers to pray that included these lines. "I renounce all these uses of my body as an instrument of unrighteousness, and by so doing, I ask you to break all the bondages of Satan that has brought into my life by this involvement. I now present my body to you as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to you, and I reserve the sexual use of my body only for marriage. I renounce the lie that you have created me or anyone else to be homosexual. I affirm that you clearly forbid homosexual behavior. I renounce any bondage of Satan or attachments of evil spirits that have perverted my relationship with others. 16. And with that, my relationship with my body crystallized, as it does for so many Christian teenagers, into one based on the fear and expectation of betrayal. They became it, and it was the domain of temptation, even satanic deception, to be prayed against, suppressed, and ignored. Purity culture is a phrase used to describe the heady atmosphere of shame surrounding young people's sexuality, particularly in the UK and US evangelical contexts, although it goes much further than that. In youth groups and Bible camps throughout the global West, fear of our sexual bodies is built on metaphors of wilting flowers or pieces of chewing gum, sullied as they are passed around a circle from person to person. The more people who handle the flower or the gum, the dirtier and more used up they become. The lesson, of course, is that this is what happens to our bodies, or the so-called gift of virginity, with each sexual experience. By the time we meet our God-ordained spouses, we might be too dirty or too impure to be desired. These object lessons make our bodies into its rather than thems, items to be used up rather than our very selves. These metaphors got under my skin and made it feel as though that skin itself was wilting or dirty whenever I or anyone else tried to love it. Siblings in Christ, these are not our metaphors. They are not inherited from a rich tradition of faithful worshippers reflecting on their relationship to God and their fellow human beings. They were formed in the crucible of a shrinking 20th century church panicking that young people were lost to the world and that their bodies, minds, and spirits needed to be controlled to be kept. These images, shot through with shame, have taken so many of us captive. So, where might we turn for alternative images? Images that are more liberating, loving, and faithful to our tradition. I find that the rich physicality of the Hebrew Bible is no surprise to Jews, but Christians have a tendency to blush through the sex scenes and fast forward to the Pauline epistles. We have the immense privilege of sharing a story in which God breathed life into dust, Adam, literally the dust of the ground, and made it sensual. In the Torah and the prophets, we have a witness to the costly gift of sexuality. We see pleasure, shame, joy, pain, childbearing, child loss, sex work, rape, passionate love, and infidelity. Sensual images of fruit, water, and oil describe the risk and blessing of desire, as scripture describes the holy, foolish, and evil exploits of humans in the pursuit of love. And of course, our canon of scripture includes the Song of Songs, a collection of erotic verse in which lovers rejoice over each other's bodies. These stories and songs are far from a perfect blueprint for a liberative experience or understanding of our sexuality. Women are marginalized and abused. Sexual minorities are shunned or more often absent. Purity laws predate purity culture with their insistence on cleanliness and have themselves led to the denigration and control of women's queer and disabled bodies. But these messy stories of power, volatility, risk, and the joy of human sexuality do, at the very least, prevent ourselves from seeing our bodies as it, other, object. We are Adam, the ground itself, each of us inspired by the breath of God. The creation story in Genesis 2 demonstrates our earthly embodiment in stark terms. Our bodiliness is not an optional extra. This is driven home ultimately in Christ's incarnation, life, passion, death, and resurrection. God not only inspires bodies, but chose to be one. Our tradition does not allow us to lose sight of our flesh to focus on our spirits. So we must learn to live with our bodies, as bodies, well. My sexual spiritual revolution came from the Christian mystical tradition. I was at university and I fell in love with amazing Christian mystics, starting with Teresa of Avila and kind of working backwards in time. And again, this tradition is far too complicated to be a perfect map to sexual liberation. I wished that the mystics that I've fallen in love with were perfect proto-feminists leading the charge on sexual liberation, but many did have a conservative understanding of gender and wrote enthusiastically on bodily and sexual self-denial as an essential part of ascetic and contemplative practice. But nonetheless, I have been surprised and delighted to find out that mysticism has so much more to do with our bodies than I'd expected as a student. So one of my favorites is Hadewig of Brabant. Dutch people in the room, I'm sorry. A 13th century Beguine and mystic. Hadewig was famously overwhelmed by a vision one Pentecost when she saw Christ come to her as a man, wonderful and beautiful, and with glorious face. She describes how her heart and all her veins and all her limbs quivered with eager desire as Jesus gave himself to her in bread and wine. She writes, "After that he came himself to me, took me entirely in his arms and pressed me to him. And all my members felt his in full felicity, in accordance with the desire of my heart and my humanity." To describe this experience between Hadewig and Christ, a nun, and her Lord as sexual or erotic is not to suggest that it is somehow not holy. Only that the language of sensuality, of pleasure and sexuality was the best she could find for describing an overwhelming experience of divine love that overtook her whole being, body, soul. Hadewig is not alone. In fact, one of the things I've had most fun with as I researched for this chapter was that the very church tradition that alienated me from my body, which has created the metaphors that make our bodies dangerous or damaged, it inherits this mystical, erotic language of worship and adoration. Now, I grew up going to Soul Survivor, the charismatic Christian youth camp, and one of the songs that came up most often was one called How He Loves by the David Crowder Band. Does anyone here know it? Is it just me? Shamara knows it. And in this song, there is a bit that goes, "We are his portion, he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If his grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. And heaven meets earth like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest, and I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that he loves us." And this song is often ridiculed as a classic example of Jesus is my boyfriend evangelical worship songwriting. But I think that the medieval mystics trademarked Jesus is my boyfriend first. And like Hadewig, David Crowder here extols the beauty of God and desires to be overwhelmed by an experience of divine union, bending beneath the very weight of divine presence, getting lost in the eyes of Christ, Heart racing as the kiss joins heaven and earth. Body and spirit become indistinguishable, and the worshipper is joined in love to the lover of all creation. The semantics of sex, of charismatic and mystical spirituality intertwine as they seek to capture the very heights of human experience as we live between desire and satisfaction. It's often said that evangelical traditions express and teach their theology primarily in their music. And so I wonder what would happen if the churches of my youth taught the sexual ethics suggested by their worship songs. If they taught that our sexual bodies reveal divine love in their eroticism, not just in their chastity. I remember one of my university supervisors, who some of you know and have been taught by, Louise Nelstrop, mischievously asking her first-year undergraduates whether it's okay to love God erotically, and watching them shift uncomfortably, looking for an inoffensive answer. But the witness of the medieval mystics and much of modern charismatic worship music is, to my mind, a resounding yes. Our bodies are agents of revelation in their experiences of desire, pleasure, and fulfillment, as they experience union with themselves, with others, and with God. And our tradition bears witness to this holy, liberative view of our embodiment and our sexuality. We are not mere objects. That teaching that makes our bodies crumpled flowers, chewed gum, or instruments of corruption is a denial of what it is to be human, to participate in the bodily resurrection of Christ, and to experience the overwhelming love of God and neighbor with all our senses. So thank you for listening to me. I'm now going to introduce a time where we're going to use our bodies in a very gentle way to pray. Where I'm based in East London, we have been trying something since the first lockdown called Lectio Visceralis. Now, I know that some of you did Lectio Divina yesterday with Claire, and Lectio Visceralis is just reading the body, reading and discerning in and with and through our bodies using gentle movements in response to scripture or poetry. And we've done this with themes around creation. We did one for Black History Month, which was really beautiful. And these are based on principles of liberation theology of Augusto Boal and Theatre of the Oppressed. And if you want to know about it, I'll talk to you about it over lunch. But we're going to get going with some praying. And as we begin, I'm going to invite us to do a gentle breathing prayer. And so at this point, I invite you to make yourself comfortable. If you want to move, move. If you want to sit on the floor, sit on the floor. Give yourself a bit of a shake, make sure that you're comfortable where you are. We're going to be praying for the rest of this session. So make sure that you are in a good position and ready to do that. As you make yourself comfortable, I invite you to either close your eyes or lower your gaze. So let us pray. The Spirit of God is breath, life, and movement. Breathing in, I'm aware of my in-breath. Breathing out, I'm aware of my out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Breathing in, I become aware of my whole body. Breathing out, I welcome the miracle of being alive in this moment. Aware of my body, welcoming life. Breathing in, I'm aware of my feelings. Breathing out, I welcome my feelings with compassion, embracing all my feelings, welcoming with compassion. Breathing in, I'm aware of my gratitude for all the ways that I'm learning and growing. Breathing out, I welcome my joy. Feeling grateful, welcoming joy. Breathing in, I'm aware of our community here, breathing together on Iona, online, all over the world. Breathing out, I draw strength from all of you who are gathered with me in this place. Community breathing together, drawing strength from each other in love. For the next part of this prayer, you're welcome to keep your eyes closed or to open them for a little while if you would like to. I'm just going to explain what's going to happen next. So in the central part of our prayer, we use imagination, emotion, and simple movements to reflect on our place in the family of things. The vehicle for our reflection will be the poem Wild Geese by the great American poet Mary Oliver. And here is the poem beginning to end. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. We're going to reflect more deeply on this poem by breaking it into 4 parts. At the end of each part, I'll invite you to pause and think about what you've heard, and I'll invite you to respond to the reading, not with words, but by using movement to create simple sculptures. We create sculptures with our bodies just by gently moving our arms, hands, heads, faces, whatever parts of our bodies we are comfortable with moving to represent the feelings that the poem has brought up. You can remain seated to do that. Now we'll start working through Oliver's poem. I'll read the poem 1 part at a time. Each part will follow the same pattern of listening and moving and response. First, I'll invite everyone to close their eyes. Then I'll read through that part of the poem, pause for a moment and repeat it. I'll read through that same part a 3rd time, and with your eyes still closed, I'll guide you to create a simple sculpture that responds to the words you've heard. The sculptures that you create will be your prayers, expressing your thoughts and emotions before God. As we move from one part of the poem to the other, I'll invite you to go back to your sculptures and change them, reacting to the new words and shaping new expressions with our bodies. Don't worry, I'll guide you every way. And we'll begin this exercise with a prayer. Just to be is a blessing. Just to live is holy. Spirit of God, be with us as we listen closely to this poem. Guide our movements. Help us to explore what our bodies are saying in response to the words that we hear. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already, as we listen to the first part of the poem. And as you listen, pay attention to your emotions. What do you notice? What surprises you? What disturbs you? Listen closely. Listen with your whole body. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Now, with your eyes still closed, listen once more to the passage, and I'll guide you in using your body to create a response to these words. As soon as you start hearing the words of the poem, begin to shape your body into a sculpture that responds to these words, using your hands, your arms, your neck, and your head, or any other part of your body that you feel called to use. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. With your eyes still closed, keep moving your body. What is the shape of your hands now? What is the tilt of your head? Where are your elbows, your shoulders? What is the shape of your spine? Use your face and any part of your body to express what is in your heart. And once you've got it, hold that position. How does it feel in your body? In your hands, your shoulders, your head? Where is the tension? Where is the rest? Is there a word or a phrase coming to your mind? Okay, release and relax. If you wish, you're welcome to say your word or phrase aloud, and I'll repeat it here at the microphone. So just shout out if you would like to. Open. Relief. Surrender. Held. Yes. Genuine. Warmth. Thank you. Okay. If you've opened your eyes, you can close them again as we listen to the short second part of the poem together. Tell me about despair. Yours. And I will tell you mine. Tell me about despair. Yours. And I will tell you mine. With your eyes still closed, return to the shape of the previous sculpture that you created and hold that shape for a moment.
I'll repeat the part of the poem we've just heard. And as soon as you start hearing the words, begin to shape your body into a new sculpture, responding to these new words. Slowly shape your hands, your arms, your neck, and your head, and any other parts of your body you feel called to use. So, tell me about despair. Yours. And I will tell you mine. Tell me about despair. Yours. And I will tell you mine. With your eyes still closed, keep moving your body. What is the shape of your hands now? What is the tilt of your head? Where are your elbows, your shoulders? How has your spine moved? And once you've got it, hold that position. How does this feel in your body, in your hands, in your shoulders, in your head? Where is the tension? Is there any part of your body that feels at rest? Is there another word or phrase coming to mind? Hold that for a moment. Okay, release and relax. And as before, if you wish, you're welcome to say your word or phrase aloud. And again, I'll repeat it here. Surprise. Empathy. Grasping each other. Pain. Rage. Tension. Crumpled. Tears. Open. Reaching. Now we close our eyes again to listen to the third part of the poem. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Now, with your eyes still closed, return to the shape of the previous sculpture that you created and hold that shape just for a moment. I'll repeat the reading that we've just heard, and again, as soon as you start hearing the words of the poem, begin to shape your body into another new sculpture that responds to these words. Slowly shape your hands, your arms, your neck, and your head, and any other parts of your body. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. And with your eyes still closed, keep moving your body. What is the shape of your hands, the tilt of your head? Where are your elbows, your shoulders, your spine? Use your face and every part of your body to express what is in your heart. And once you've got it, hold that position. How does this feel in your body? In your hands, in your shoulders, in your head? Where is the tension? Where is the rest? Is there a word or phrase coming into your mind now? And you can release and relax that sculpture. Again, you're welcome to say your word or phrase aloud, and then we'll move on to the fourth and final part of the poem. Awakening. Release and praise. Expectant. Faithful and light was that. Sorry? Full. Thaw. Okay. THAW. Oh, or. You see, I'm trying to be meditative and I can't even do words. Or, thank you, Victoria. Vulnerable. How can I do vulnerable and not or? Sorry, I missed the last one. Reaching. Released. Carousel. Okay, thank you, everyone. Now, close your eyes as we listen to the fourth and final part of the poem. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Now, with your eyes closed, return to the shape of the previous sculpture that you created and hold that shape for a moment. As before, I'll repeat the reading we've just heard. And as soon as you begin to hear the words of the poem, begin to shape your body into a new sculpture, slowly shaping your hands, your arms, your neck, your head, any other part of your body you feel called to use. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. You can keep moving your body, noticing the shape of your hands, the tilt of your head. Where are your elbows, your shoulders now? What is the shape of your spine? What has changed about the way you are using your faith or holding your body? And once you've got it, hold that position. Notice how it feels in your body. Notice the tension.
and notice the rest. Is there a word or a phrase that's coming to your mind now? Okay, release and relax. And for the last time, you're welcome to say your word or phrase out loud. Movement. Animated. Free. Whole, supported. Connected. Blessing. Belonging. Sleep. Safe. Okay, we close our body prayers with a verbal prayer. Holy Spirit of God, Jesus, the body of God, God, the parent who birthed us, give us back the gift of our bodies. Forgive us where we have objectified ourselves and others. Let us share in the pleasure you take in creation as we meet ourselves, others, and you. Let us experience the joy of loving union with all that we have and all that we are. Amen. Thank you for joining in with me. Thank you for doing something a bit different and taking a bit of a risk. I'm really grateful to you all for going with me. If that wasn't for you, don't worry, and please tell me over lunch. And it's 2:55. We agreed that we were going to go until 2:45, though I know that some of you may need to leave. You're very welcome to do so, but we've got 10 minutes for any questions or reflections on how that was. Please do. The floor is open. 5 minutes. Thanks, Ruth. Shamara's got a mic.
Oh, you just want to say wow. Okay.
Thank you. And I found myself thinking of a time some while ago when Peter MacDonald was leader, and he introduced some of what some of us thought was way out, and a few of us thought was, oh, how nice. and there's a change in the community that so many found it so nice. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you. I would echo what Chris has said, and we have done a couple of things in the Abbey involving our bodies. I did something with Ali Marshall last season, which was reasonably well received in the Abbey. I so often find myself at a yoga class feeling like I've been at worship. And sometimes when I'm swimming, sometimes when I'm running. So I think, you know, the incarnation of Christ and the recognizing the way we embody ourselves through worship is so important. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was really beautiful. And I've never done Lectio Visceralis before, never heard of it.
We made it up.
Fantastic. I love it. So thank you. And I would like to try and use that in the future.
There is, for anyone who's interested in this, this is the first time I've done it in a room with real people. We designed this for Zoom. So there's a network of us who are based in East London, but you can access it from all over the place. So on my last slide, I've got a reading list and my details there. So if you would like to join in with any other kind of embodied prayer, then please do just drop me an email and I'll add you to our list of people to join in next time. Was there anyone for whom this really didn't work and they would like to say that in this space? Otherwise, you can talk to me afterwards. But yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. What didn't you like? Can you speak into
quite honest, I can't get in touch with all this arty-farty stuff, really, if I'm being honest.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.
I'm not condemning you at all.
No, I know. I asked.
Would I do that?
No, it's fabulous. Thanks.
Don Stubbings, West Midlands. I tended to fall asleep, actually.
Yeah.
Most of the time. The kind of thing that you're doing, I find if I'm moving, if I'm on a train, or if I'm sitting beside moving water, or I'm on the shore and the waves coming in and out.
Sure.
The kind of thing you're doing happens to me there.
So if you have something as a kind of focus or you're in movement somehow, yeah, that's really helpful.
There has to be movement.
Thank you. Victoria.
I think I'm in a bit of an emotionally vulnerable space. So I find it very hard to concentrate on what you were saying, and my mind was going to different places.
Sure, thank you. And it is emotionally vulnerable, and we've all been, I think, very vulnerable with each other this week, which I've really appreciated, but also I can feel myself needing to take some time out and to recover from that. And I'm sure that many of you can too. So please do make that space for yourselves in the next week or so. I think, oh, Pat. And then I'll hand back over to Ruth.
I want to say thank you. It's a huge relief to me to be in a session which doesn't have too many words. I really, really struggle by the time I get to the third session in a day, and I just can't retain things anymore. So I really love that. And I suppose I was just slightly reflecting that when I think about bodies, I suppose I think about hospitals or, you know, sort of different places. But often in prayer, that's the time where actually words I use much less of. So that felt very good to me. Thank you.
All right, last one.
Thank you, Liz Dowler, Thames Valley. I was moved by what Pat just said. We've all been through 2 or more years of worrying about health and hospitals and bodies. And but what the pandemic has given to me, and I know to others, is a positive consciousness of bodies. And because we've been doing a daily stretch class, and because people go for a walk and you meet your neighbors going for a walk or something, if you're able to do those things, we've been fortunate. And I think actually what I've taken from this week, from readings in the Abbey Church and from some of the sessions, is realizing how much I've imbibed the Protestant work ethic of your body is there to labor and to beat into submission. And thank God that's gone.
I often say that as an Anglo-Catholic, I end up with Protestant work ethic and Catholic guilt. What's up with that?
A comment from the online. Jan adds a comment. I loved it too. Living in Norfolk, where thousands of wild geese arrive in autumn and leave in spring, it resonated very powerfully.
So thank you, and I'm going. Molly, thank you. I don't know that we need more words other than just to say thank you. There will be time this evening for us to have a roundup and a reflective session with everybody together, but Shamara will be gone and Anna has already gone. So let me just take this time to say Victoria, Annika, Shamara, Molly, Anna, Jack and Annie, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We invited you to come and give us a glimpse of the book. You've given us a glimpse of your lives. You've taken us on a very deep and powerful journey. I think we've been emotionally vulnerable, spiritually vulnerable, theologically vulnerable, bodily vulnerable. You've given us a glimpse of a range of aspects of our lives, which maybe some of us have not been in touch with for a while, or are very familiar with and wanted to celebrate. Well, there will be more time for this later.